Every parent in the room has had this conversation, been in this situation. Every young adult in the room, even if you're not a parent, you've probably been on the other side of this conversation. It goes a little something like this. You are on a trip as the parent to a store for something that, I don't know what the occasion is. The little one really needs this thing. Maybe it's a piece of sports equipment or, something for school. Or maybe it's just something that, you've told them in due time they'll be able to get one of these or one of those. And so now's the time. It's come. We're going to go to the store. We're going to get that thing that they maybe they really needed, or maybe it's just something they're going to greatly enjoy. And again, here's how it goes down once you get to the store. Your child now sees everything on the shelf, right? And now they want this and some of that and one of those, a couple of these, and definitely one of whatever that thing is over there, right? They're wanting another one of those things and one of these things and one of that. And by the way, on the way home, can we stop and get ice cream? You know what I mean? Some of you younger ones are like, yeah, sounds about right. That's how it's supposed to go down, right? And then you as the parent, you say something like, honey, we discussed this at home and you understood it then. And now here we are. I'm going to get you this one really nice thing that's going to last you a while, that you really need, that you're actually going to enjoy for some time to come. And we're not going to get any of these shiny little cheap things that you're asking for off the shelf. It's not going to happen. And probably, yes, we'll get ice cream on the way home because we want ice cream, right? So we're cool with the ice cream. But we're going to get that one thing. Now, parents in the room, I want you to come to this. I want you to be here in this moment that we just described. You're going to get the one thing. You go to the store. They want everything. And you're trying now to tell them, and you've explained to them, no, we're just going to get the one thing. We can't get all the things. We can only get the one thing. That's how it's going to go down. I want you to put yourself there. You're like, picture your hands. You're gripping the shopping cart. Feel it. Feel it in your hands right now. Close your eyes if you have to. I want you to hear the volume of the kid beside you making his or her case. I want you there in the moment. What happens next? You know what happens next, right? You've told them, no, we're going to stick to the plan. What happens next? It looks like this, but what's their play, right? What do they say? Right, but... And then what comes after that? They want it all, right? You said I can only get this. I say I want all of it. You say, no, we're only going to get this one thing. And they say, I want it all. Now, they can't have it all, but that doesn't change the fact that they want it all. They want the big, nice thing, and they want all the shiny little things that caught their attention as they were walking along in the aisles of the store. Did you know we still do this as adults? We still do it. I think some things haven't changed much. They just look different, right? They just look a little different the way we do it. It happens in the church too. Okay, we're not immune to this. We also do this, okay? There are people who want the big gift. They want eternal life. They want eternity in the presence of God forever. They want heaven. They want Jesus to be their Savior. Okay, they want their sins forgiven. They want to be righteous in God's sight. They want all those things, but then we also have this tendency to, wow, as we're going along, walking through life, we see all these shiny little things that catch our attention, and boy, we kind of want some of that too. We kind of want to chase after that. We kind of want to seek after that, like almost make that like I can't get my mind off of it for like a month or 3 months or 6 months, or then it becomes, we like to call them hobbies, don't we? But really, they're a little more than that. There's a significant amount of investment going into these things, of our time and our money and other resources, our family. I'm not saying we're like super neglectful, but sometimes it's like, family, you know how important this is to me, and so I appreciate that you appreciate that I need some time to devote to this, and family just kind of stays at home. It has to hang out while you're into that. It sounds a little not so good when we put it like that. Isn't it, right? But these shiny little things that catch our attention, they don't satisfy. They're not long term. They don't reward us in the long run, right? They're effectively like the little toys that come out of the quarter machine when you go into a restaurant or something. It's just, hey, that place just wants, just maybe 75 cents of your money more, like it's It's just there to grab your attention, get you to make a bad decision, right? Those are never good decisions, right? The kid swallows the bouncy ball or something like that. It never goes well. And you're like, I spent $0.25 for this. But that's kind of what we're looking at when we start getting into these things. They're not rewarding. They're not helpful. In the end, you regret it. They're not things we need to go running after. When we're talking about spiritual matters like this, these cheap, shiny things are a very serious problem, because Scripture tells us over and over and over again that you can't have all these other things and God too. You can't have gods and God. The Bible tells us over and over. Now let's make sure everybody in the room understands here that gods with a little g and plural, it doesn't necessarily mean, I'm not necessarily talking only about little carved out wooden objects that you might decorate a little bit yourself and pray to. We're not just talking about that kind of stuff. No, gods are anything that you seek and serve. Those are gods, things that you seek and serve. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus said, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. There he's specifically talking about wealth, but at the end, but in the midst of it, he's talking about anything besides him that you make a god, right? You can't serve two masters, right? You're going to hate one, love the other, be devoted to one, and despise the other. That's the way it's going to go down, okay? God gives us a choice, gods or God. You can't serve both. You have to make a choice. And God's not being mean by saying it's either me or the others, right? He's not like, well, you got to make a choice. That's not what he's doing. It's not out of meanness, and it's not an issue of God lacking ability like an actual parent here on earth. We're limited by time and finances and energy. You know what I mean? It's not that for God. That's not the case. The issue is this. All these many little gods, they work against the one true God. They're in opposition. They're in competition with one another. All the little gods also, they take from you and don't give you any kind of lasting reward, like we said. But God is the opposite of that, right? God wants to give to you. God wants to give you a great reward. All these little gods, they're incapable of caring about you at all. And God created you to care for you. God created you to love you, to have a relationship with you that goes two ways, a mutual relationship. He loves you and provides for you. You love him and honor him, right? That's God. He wants to love you, care for you, provide for you. So this morning, I want to bring you this message called Gods or God. Gods or God. And our text is going to be Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 through 24. That's what we're going to look at today. And we're going to examine the command to serve God, the choice to serve God, the reasons to serve God, and then, the seriousness of serving God. All right, that's what we're going to see here. As we come to Joshua chapter 24, a little background, we find ourselves in the middle of a powerful charge to the congregation of the Lord, Israel at that time, to serve God and to serve him faithfully, to honor him, to continue on faithfully with God so that they can continue on in victory with God. Because they've had a couple episodes where they weren't so faithful to God, and they saw that they don't get victory with God when they're not faithful to God. So they've learned that lesson the hard way. But Joshua is the one giving the charge here at this point in the book. You might remember Joshua is the faithful leader of Israel at this time. He has at this point taken over from Moses quite some time ago, years earlier. And when we come to Joshua chapter 24, Joshua is old. He says this much to the congregation. He says, I'm going to go the way of all the earth soon, right? What does he mean? I'm not going to be on this earth much longer. My life is almost over. And he's telling the people about this, and he goes on and says, basically, with all of these miracles in view, everything, he starts reciting all that God's done, with all that God had done to provide for these people in the past, with all the great battles that he won for them, the land that they acquired, the possessions that they received as spoils of war, the things they had acquired like that, even the times when they weren't faithful. And they got to see what God's wrath can look like, even just on a relatively small scale for God. With all of these breathtaking, momentous occasions, these examples of God's ability and his work among them, Joshua has this to say in verse 14. He says, now therefore, Fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers, the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Verse 16 says, the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, and who did these great signs in our sight and preserved us through all the way in which we went and among all the peoples through whose midst we passed. The Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. And then verse 19, then Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do harm and consume you after he has done good to you. The people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Verse 23, now therefore, put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. This morning, I want us to put ourselves in the sandals of this congregation here, hearing these words from Joshua and applying it to our decision today to choose God, to choose gods or God, to choose this day whom we will serve. So doing that, the first thing that we're going to see here that Joshua is telling us is a command, right? We see the command first of all, and it's the command to serve God. We saw it right there at the beginning of verse 14 when he said, now therefore, okay, he's just telling them to do it first of all. Fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away all these other gods, right? Fear the Lord. That's the first part of the command. Now, the way we use the word fear today, obviously, is always in a negative way, right? Knees shaken and, you're shuddering in fear, that sort of thing. We know of dogs who have been abused, and now you see it on shelter listings all the time. This dog fears men, right? Because they've been abused by a man. Or even, and I don't mean this to, don't laugh, I'm not trying to be funny, but you see sometimes they're afraid of brooms and things that look like a broom, because whatever they've been abused by, now they've developed a fear of. We know of people who have been, they've been in a situation alone and in the dark, maybe walking out to a car late at night and got mugged, and they develop a very serious, debilitating, instant fear of the dark and possibly being alone, that sort of thing. And certainly this congregation of the Lord at this time that Joshua is addressing has felt this visceral sort of fear before. They've disobeyed God. I mentioned that before. They've disobeyed God before and lost a battle that they thought they couldn't lose at Ai, right? 36 men didn't make it home. That's 36 sons whose parents were there at the camp, mourning, grieving this loss. That's potentially some fathers of some children and some husbands of some wives who didn't come home. And those wives, those families were grieving that loss. That's a big deal. They disobeyed God in Achan, remember, along with his whole household. They lost their lives as a result of that. The whole congregation was part of that, participated in that. They had to. Remember, everybody was there. Everybody knew what happened. Everybody knew why it happened. Everybody saw it happen. Certainly, this congregation feared the Lord, knowing what his wrath was like, but Joshua isn't pleading with these people to be afraid of God, to be scared of God. The fear he's talking about is what we might call old-fashioned fear. We're talking about to respect, to highly regard, to hold up in the highest form of reverence in our minds and in our heart, right? Have you ever encountered those snotty kids who don't fear their parents? They don't fear teachers. They don't fear any adults like this old-fashioned fear, the way they should. It's scary when they're teenagers. It really is. Like it genuinely, it's where a lot of danger in this world comes from, is children who get to a point where now they can do something and they don't have this fear of parents. teachers, authority figures. They don't have this kinds of fear, right? These are the kids that you can tell them to do something very normal for a child to do, and they're like, nah. They're like, excuse me? And they're like, not going to do it. Right? And you're thinking, what on earth? This child is broken. Something is not right. Something has not been taught to them correctly to begin with. Why are they this way? How did they get to this point? And how do I fix it now, right? Your mind starts racing, because at least it does for me, because these kids, like I said, they scare me because they're kind of out of control, and they've not had that right baseline set for them, right? Well, look, don't be one of these snotty, bratty children of God. Don't be found not fearing God. Fear God the way that Joshua is calling these people to fear God. Respect who he is, what he knows, how he works, what he says, his word, right? His ability and his will. Hold him up in the purest form of reverence, again, in your mind and in your heart. And serve him, Joshua says. Fear him and serve him. Do his will, right? Fearing God doesn't just happen in the mind. It needs to come out in our actions, right? If you actually honor, respect, revere someone, and they ask you to do something or command you to do something, especially when they've proven to you it's for your own good, they love you and they want the best for you, you should never go, nah, or I'll get around to it. That sort of thing. No, our fearing God should come out in our actions. And remember, serving God isn't just, directly, paying tithes to God. It's not just sharing his word, these direct things where you're like, I am doing God's work that he wants me to do. No, there's also serving other people is serving God. When you serve people the way that he wants you to serve them, you are serving him. Jesus, remember, said that when you give a drink to someone who's thirsty, when you give clothes to someone who needs clothing, when you feed someone who's hungry, when you show hospitality to someone who needs a place to stay, when you go and visit someone who's sick or in prison, when you do that for those people, Jesus says, you're doing it for me. You're doing it to me, he said. Right? I mean, that's pretty direct. It's not just like, hey, I take note of that and it won't go unrewarded. That's true. But he actually goes a step further and says, what you do for these people, you've done to me. We're doing it to Jesus, for Jesus. So fear God and serve him. And then Joshua says, in sincerity and truth. Okay, God knows when you're sincere and when you're not. God knows when you're glad that you're doing his will and when you're not so glad. God knows when you're serving your brother but hating him in your heart. God knows about that sincerity. So be sincere. And then have you noticed how the Bible always sneaks that word truth into so many commands? Have you ever caught that? Have you ever noticed that? We're called to worship in spirit and truth. We're called to be sanctified by the Spirit with faith in the truth. We're to put on the new self in righteousness and holiness of the truth. It's in there all the time. Now, where do we get the truth? Contrary to what the world will tell you, truth, wisdom, all of that stuff, it's not internally sourced, it's externally sourced. Now, you can get bad truth, false truth, right? You can get that from the outside, but you can also get it from God, right? That's where the source of truth is. It's not in us. God shared that with us. That's why his word has to be held in such reverence as well for us. We've got to be in it. That's how we were talking with the teens and 20s this week about seeking God, and part of that absolutely has to be in the truth, in the word of truth. So that truth has to be involved here. So to serve him in sincerity and truth, we already talked about the sincerity part. To serve him in truth means that we don't just serve him in a way that feels good, but in a way that his word says is good. We don't just serve him in a way that feels right. This feels so right, it can't be wrong. No. Does his word say that it's right? That's critical. Sincerity and truth. And then we can't forget the final part of Joshua's command here in verse 14. Put away the other gods. Right? That's a whole sermon in itself. We don't have time to run through all of that necessarily. It'll come up again throughout the rest of this message here. But put away the other gods. You got to start cleaning house as you fear God, as you serve him in sincerity and truth. You're going to naturally see these other things have to go. Okay? That's part of the command. Now, the next part of Joshua's charge shows us that although there is a command here to do what is right, to fear God, serve him in sincerity and truth, put away the other gods, we do have a decision here to make. Joshua shows us in verse 15 that there is this choice. Okay, we got the command, and then we've got the choice being put out here in front of us. Look again at verse 15. Joshua still is speaking here, of course. And he says, if it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. And then he says, whether it's going to be these gods, these other gods, I'm going to serve the true God, right? Let's break this down real quick. If it's disagreeable in your sight, that's just kind of a fancy way of saying if you don't want to, okay? Do this. It is what is right and what God deserves. But if you don't want to, choose something else to serve, right? Pick something else to serve, someone else to serve. Now, no one is saying that it's smart to choose some other gods rather than the one true God. That's not what Joshua is saying here, but he is saying you do have a choice here, which implies very strongly you do have to make a decision here. You've got to think this through, and you've got to make a decision. And then Joshua shows very clearly when he says, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, he's saying very clearly, you got to make that choice. You got to make a decision here. You can't ride the fence. You can't sit at both tables. You can't live in both worlds. You can't have the gods who take from you and the God who wants to give to you. When Joshua says to choose, whether the gods which your father served beyond, which were beyond the river, he says, okay, those previous gods from previous generations before they had come to where they are now, when he says that, maybe we could consider for ourselves, are we simply doing what our parents did? Do we have some gods in our life because they were gods of our parents or gods of our grandparents or aunts, uncles, cousins, other generations before us that we saw them doing it? And so we bow down to the gods of work and career and money or something else because maybe that's what our fathers did, our mothers did, that previous generation. And then when Joshua says, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. Now they were in the lands of the Amorites. Their generation was here now. He says, when he says that, maybe we could easily consider whether or not we're serving the gods of America in whose land we are living. I'm all for being a respectable American, being loyal, being proud of what we get right, and certainly being thankful of the freedom that we have and the sacrifices that were made, like ultimate sacrifices, like Jesus-style sacrifices that were made for that freedom, 100%. But we can't make the gods of America our gods. When we choose God over all other so-called gods, it shouldn't be a surprise. We choose God over all gods. So make your choice. Choose wisely. And Joshua kind of helps there. He obviously doesn't leave the congregation of the Lord without a good example, does he, right? Most of us probably have his final words in this little sections printed somewhere. It might be a shower curtain. It might be a little stitched thing up on the wall or a throw blanket or something. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Right? You should do this, but if you don't want to, you need to make a decision. Quit sitting on the fence. And then he gives them the example, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. There's a good leader saying, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to lead my household to do the right thing. You guys choose wisely. And then you know what's interesting? After Joshua gives them the command and then says, it's your choice to make though. Choose for yourselves. It's the people who go on to give the reasons. It's the people who go on to give the reasons why God is the right choice. Joshua's telling them they need to make a decision. They should choose God. I'm going to choose God. And then they're the ones who come up with these great reasons. They recite these wonderful attributes and accomplishments of God as the reasons why they're going to choose God. All right, look at what they said there in verses 16 through 18. It says, the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, and who did these great signs in our sight and preserved us through all the way in which we went, and among all the peoples through whose midst we passed. The Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. Far be it from us that we would forsake the Lord to serve other gods, they said. They're saying God is the obvious choice, right? Now, let's kind of just throw to the side whether they ever had trouble with living up to this, okay? Let's just look at what they were saying and whether it was right or wrong. It was right. God is the obvious choice, right? And then they give the reasons. For, they say, for the Lord our God is he who did these wonderful things, right? They lay out these things. They point out that God delivered them from bondage. For them, remember, it was literally a physical bondage. Egypt had them in chains, doing hard labor. This was their life. And God heard their cries, and he miraculously delivered them from that situation. You remember that? Well, they pointed it out. They reminded us of it, right? And then they point out how God fought for them, how he preserved them, they say, aka kept them alive as they were facing hostile people in foreign lands, right? And then they mention how God drove out their enemies, aka God gave them victory. God gave them what he promised he would give them. They had what he said, you go into this land, remain faithful to me, I will give it to you. God did what he said he was going to do. Today, do you, as a Christian, do you have the ability on your own to set yourself free from sin? Did you do that yourself? Do you have that power? Did you earn that? Did you merit that? No, like the Israelites in Moses' day, we cry out to God. Okay, we do that. We do what God has called us to do and says, I will hear you if you do. But it's God who hears the call and actually has the power and delivers us. It's God who has that power to set us free from bondage to sin, right? Let me ask you another question. Today, do you have the ability, the power on your own to set yourself free from great spiritual forces, great spiritual enemies that you face? No. God has given you tools, and it's in God's power, through God's power, that you do that. Like the Israelites in Moses and Joshua's day, it's God who fights those battles for us when we live faithfully to him. It's God who has that power, that ability to run those formidable forces out of your midst, like he did in Joshua's day and has for all time for his people, right? It's no wonder ancient Israel told Joshua, because of these reasons and more, we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. This is the logical conclusion. This is the logical conclusion based on the God that he is and all that he has done and can do. The gods of money, the gods of culture and society and reputation and career and status and self, what have they done for you? Ultimately, what have they done for you? I think most of us that have just a few years on us have come to realize these things don't do a whole lot. These things were fun to chase for a little while. Then they became a heartache and a headache and stressful. And then they started to bite back. And they don't do anything of lasting value. We know that now if we have just a few years on us and our eyes are open even just a little bit. What has the God of all creation done for you? Only everything, right? Only everything that lasts and really matters. Here's how this works in the real world, you guys. Sometime this week, on a typical day, as you're doing typical things, the world is going to set before you this, they're going to present this challenge, gods or God. And you need to be prepared and ready to be able to say, to be able to remember all these reasons why you can say, and mean it when you say it, I will serve the Lord, for he is my God. Okay, why don't you do this thing? Well, that's not particularly God-honoring. I will serve the Lord, for he is my God. Well, it's not that big of a deal. Come on, just skip that and come over here. I will serve the Lord, for he is my God. You need to be prepared to say that, mean it, and actually do the God-honoring thing in any given situation, every single time. What's going to honor God? Because he is my God. I have chosen to serve him. He is my Lord. I'm going to serve him. So now, with the command having been given and with an understanding of the nature of our choice here, and remembering all these powerful reasons that we ought to choose to serve God, we need to acknowledge the seriousness here, okay? I'm going to be honest with you here. I mean, I always am, but I'm going to be a little open here. This is why I cringe quietly when young children are immersed into Christ. As though these bubbly, keyword innocent, smiling little kids understand the commitment that they're making, the sacrifice they're signing up for, the holiness of the God that they're serving, the ramifications of submitting themselves before God in vain. Joshua makes it clear that this is no relationship to enter into lightly. Look at verse 19. It says, "Then Joshua said to all the people, 'You will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgression or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, and he will turn and do harm and consume you after he's done good to you.' The people said to Joshua, 'No, but we will serve the Lord.' Joshua said to the people, 'You are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him.' And they said, 'We are witnesses.' Then Joshua speaking here again in verse 23, and he says, 'Now therefore put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel.' The people said to Joshua, 'We will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice.'" So they've heard the seriousness, and they said, "We're going to do it." In verse 19 there, though, notice that Joshua just straight up told the people, "You won't be able to do this. You're not, I don't know that you're capable of doing this." And the reason that he gives, he says, "For he is a holy God." The Lord is a holy God. Joshua is just making a point here, okay? He's not actually saying this is literally impossible to do, because he's already said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," right? It's possible, but he's saying, like, I don't know if you understand the seriousness of this, right? He's making a point that if you're not serious about this commitment you're making, this won't go well. You've got to be the real deal what you're signing up for here. God is holy, and he is looking for people who want to be holy too. People who also want to be holy. We're talking about people who want to be set apart for service to God. Not a pew sitter, not someone who, when I'm feeling particularly down, maybe I'll go and be lifted up by attending a church somewhere. Not that. He wants people who want to be set apart, who want to specifically sign up to serve him. That, my friend, is what God has been calling for all along. He's not looking for people who are making a decision based only on emotion. He's not looking for people who just want to give him a test drive. He's not looking for people who are going to put their hand to the plow and look backward and plow this row that's all like this because they're not paying attention to what they're doing. He wants people who are focused, head down, having chosen to respect, honor, and serve him only. And Joshua continues on there in verse 20. He says, "If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do harm and consume you after he's done good to you." Right? Acknowledging that God has done and will do and is ready and willing and would love to do good for you. Deliver you from bondage. Right? Fight your battles for you. He wants to be there and use all his power for that. But if you sign up for this and then you turn against him and become his enemy, all that power can be used against you as well. You will at some point face his wrath. Peter speaks to this point in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 and 21. You guys know this. He says, "For if after they," talking about Christians, "have escaped the defilements of the world by the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ," they found the way, they took God up on his offer, they've escaped what defiled them out of the world, right? If that happens and they are again entangled in them, those defilements, and are overcome by them, so they leave God and they go after that. They say, "You know what, it was fun, but this is more fun." They're overcome by that. It says the last state has become worse for them than the first. Verse 21, "For it would be better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it to turn away from the holy commandment handed on to them." You see, ultimately, it all comes back to choices. Gods or God. You can choose God. You can fear him, serve him, put away other gods, and you can have everlasting peace and joy and provision and protection and love and abundant life. But the same God who can provide all of that, the same God who delivered Israel from Egypt, out of the land of bondage, the same God who fought battles and won great victories for his people, the same God who drove out the Amorites from the land, the same God who delivered on his promise to give them the promised land, the same God who provided for and protected his people, also takes great vengeance against his enemies. Imagine this in a marriage scenario. I almost said ceremony. It's happened, I'm sure. But imagine this in a marriage scenario. After all, the Bible does call us the bride of Christ, right? So this is not a stretch. Imagine a man marrying a woman, and then that woman goes off and starts buying gifts for other men all the time. She's going out for dinner. These guys she's particularly fond of, several of them, going out for dinner, not even having supper at home with her husband. Going out with them, almost every day of the week, all except Sunday, right? Going out with these other men all the time. She's constantly forsaking plans with her husband for plans with these other men. How do you suppose the husband feels? Little cheated, right? You're not being real genuine. I'm not even sure that you love me. James 4:4 kind of gives us the Bible answer to this scenario. Talking to this kind of Christian, he says, "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world have all these other gods rather than just God." This is New Testament. This is talking about Christians. Whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. It doesn't just hurt God's feelings, doesn't just upset God. You make yourself, you sign up to be on the opposing side of this battle for eternity. You've made yourself an enemy of God. It's a serious thing to choose God. You need to be sure that you're committed. You need to be sure that you want God over and above everything else. You need to be sure that you've put away the other gods in your life. Now, you can have plenty of fun doing this. Okay, it's serious, but you can enjoy life like you've never enjoyed life. You will. You can enjoy yourself immensely. You can have peace in the midst of some of the worst circumstances that you could possibly face in life. Your head can still hit the pillow saying, but you know what? In the end, and you can recite all the wonderful things God has done and is going to do for you, the eternity ultimately that's coming. There's no better life. But you've got to be serious about this. You've got to be serious when you say, like the Israelites in verse 24, "We will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey His voice."